I saw myself on my laptop screen at 3:12 in the morning. I know the time exactly because in the video, I'm asleep on the bed behind the camera. I'm not dreaming. I'm not half awake. I'm awake, standing in the hallway, watching myself sleep in the room I'm standing in. In the recording, something is standing in front of the bathroom mirror. It doesn't look directly at its reflection at first. It leans in close, tilts its head, pulls at the corners of its mouth, blinks one eye at a time, like a creature practicing basic expressions, testing each movement as if learning how to look human. Then it turns its head, not fast, not sudden, like it already knew the camera was there. It stares straight into the lens, and in that moment, I see it smile. What makes my blood go cold is that the smile appears on the screen, before I even have time to flinch in real life. After that moment, my memory cuts out completely. No phantom feeling, no panic, just a blank space. When I come back to awareness, it's morning. I'm sitting on the kitchen floor. The laptop is still open. The video is frozen on the frame of that smile. My name is Selena Miller. I'm 29 years old. I work remotely for a software company in Chicago. If you look me up in Minnesota public records, you'll see I'm still alive. But there's a stretch of time in my life that no one can confirm, no data, no proof, where I actually was. I'm not telling this story to scare you. I'm telling it because this is the only remaining record that proves what happened in that house can't be dismissed as imagination. Not everything leaves evidence, but some things leave consequences, things no doctor can fully explain, even when they try. I lived alone in a remote part of northern Minnesota. The nearest house was almost 2 kilometers away. No neighbors, no visitors. Some weeks, I didn't speak to a single person. Working remotely made that isolation feel normal, like it was just my lifestyle. I was wrong. The first signs were small. Strange sounds late at night. Objects not where I remembered leaving them. The sensation that someone had just passed behind me in a house with no draft, no open doors. I kept telling myself it was insomnia, or stress, or my brain reacting too strongly to being alone. I was warned, not by someone else, by my own fear. But I chose to stay, not because I was brave, because I believed that leaving would mean admitting there was something in that house stronger than me, and I couldn't accept that. Not yet. My real mistake started that morning. I opened the trash to throw away cold coffee, and at the bottom was a tightly tied plastic bag. I don't remember putting it there, and the smell leaking from inside it made me go completely still, like my body understood the danger before my mind did. I stood there staring at that plastic bag for a long time before touching it. It was tied neatly and carefully, nothing like how I usually do things. I was certain I didn't remember buying it or using it. What unsettled me most was the strange sense of familiarity, as if I had held it before, but at a moment my memory could no longer reach. When I opened the bag, the first thing I noticed wasn't the sight. It was the smell. Not rot, not blood, but the exact scent of the shampoo I use every night. Precise enough that I could name the brand. Inside were hair and dried pieces of scalp, cut cleanly, carefully, as if someone had taken their time preparing them. I rushed into the bathroom and stood before the mirror. I checked every section of hair, every hairline, every tiny scratch. Nothing was missing, no wounds, no dried blood. But my scalp felt wrong, as if someone had taken me apart, studied me closely, and then put me back together with unsettling precision. I washed my hands for a long time, not because they were dirty, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just tried to make me, like an unfinished prototype. I told myself this was the result of exhaustion. But if that were true, why didn't I feel fear? Only violation. The next morning, I opened the door and found a dead bird lying on the porch. It was completely frozen. Its neck had been twisted backward at an angle that couldn't happen naturally. There were no footprints around it, no blood. It hadn't died there. It had been placed there, deliberately. What disturbed me most wasn't the bird's death, but the silence around it. No wind, no animal sounds, as if the entire area had stopped reacting. I stood there for a long time, and a thought surfaced that I didn't want to accept. This wasn't a warning. It was proof. The following morning, the bird was gone. No signs of struggle, no scattered feathers, just a deep drag mark in the snow leading straight toward my front door. It didn't point toward the forest. It pointed inward and ended right at the narrow gap beneath the door. I knelt there staring at that gap for a long time. It wasn't wide enough for an animal to crawl through, but the drag mark was unmistakable. In that moment, I stopped asking whether something was outside my house. I started asking the opposite question. How long had it already been inside? I closed the door, locked it, turned on every light in the house. I forced myself back to work, pretending everything was normal. I didn't call anyone. I didn't contact the police. I didn't want to hear myself say out loud the things I wasn't ready to believe. That was how I delayed the truth. That night, when I opened my laptop to work, I noticed the webcam was on. I didn't remember turning it on. The recording timestamp in the corner read 3:12 a.m. Before I could shut it off, a new video file appeared, and that was when I understood something wasn't just watching me. It was learning how to become me. I don't remember turning on the webcam. I don't remember granting any software permission to record. Yet the file was there, created at exactly 3:12 a.m. I stared at it for a long time, hoping it would disappear like a display glitch. But it didn't. It stayed there, waiting for me to open it, as if it knew I wouldn't be able to ignore it. In the video, the bathroom appears clearly. It's my bathroom. The camera angle is low and slightly tilted, as if it had been placed hastily on a shelf. There's no sound, no movement for the first few seconds. Then a figure steps into frame. My heart starts pounding when I realize it has the same height, the same posture as me. It stands in front of the mirror for a long time. It doesn't look directly at itself at first. It tilts its head, blinks one eye at a time, pulls the corners of its mouth up, then lets them fall. Like it's experimenting, like a creature unfamiliar with this body. I realize it isn't mimicking emotions. It's learning how to create them, one reflex at a time. When it finally raises its face, I'm forced to accept the truth I've been avoiding. That face is mine, but unfinished. The features are slightly misaligned, the expressions delayed, the eyes empty, as if they don't yet understand the act of seeing. It looks like me in the way a flawed copy resembles its original. At the end of the video, it turns and looks directly at my camera. Not by accident, not randomly. That look is intentional. And in that moment, I feel with absolute certainty that it isn't looking at the camera. It's looking at me, as if it knows exactly where I'm standing, how I'm breathing, and how terrified I am. The moment the video ends, the file vanishes from the folder. I check the trash. Nothing. I search the system history. No trace. It's as if the video never existed. I start to wonder whether I just watched a recording or witnessed something that didn't need to be saved because it had already served its purpose. I wake up one morning with no memory of when I fell asleep. My body feels heavy, like I've just come out of a long fever. My mouth is dry, my throat burns. I have the sense that I spoke a lot during the night, or screamed, but there's no memory attached to that feeling. There's dried dirt packed under my fingernails. I don't remember going outside. I check my shoes, clean. I check the door, still locked. On my wrists and shoulders are dark bruises, shaped clearly like fingerprints. Their size and placement don't match my own hands, no matter how many times I try gripping myself to compare. I stand in front of the mirror to examine the bruises. When I raise my hand, the reflection follows. But a fraction of a second later, very subtle, only noticeable if you're watching closely. In that moment, I'm no longer sure whether the reflection is mirroring me or struggling to keep up with me. I step back. The reflection steps back too, but not quite at the same time. A different kind of fear settles in. Not the fear of being watched, but the fear of being replaced. As if something had already tried living as me during the night and was now deciding whether I was still necessary. I left that house the following morning. I packed nothing but the essentials. I didn't look back. Not out of courage, but because I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't be certain I was the one leaving. I had only one thought in my mind. If I stayed one more night, I would no longer be the one telling this story. As I drove out of town, I realized I couldn't remember the road I had just taken. Entire stretches of time were missing. I didn't know where I had stopped, what I had thought, or what I had seen. It felt as if someone had crudely edited my memories, leaving gaps my brain was incapable of filling on its own. I was admitted to the hospital after collapsing at a roadside rest stop. The doctors asked me questions I couldn't answer. The date, the time, how long I had slept, whether I had used any substances. I tried to answer honestly, but every response made them exchange longer looks, as if I were telling a story they had heard before. The final diagnosis was delivered gently. Delusional disorder, short-term memory loss, visual and sensory hallucinations caused by prolonged isolation, severe sleep deprivation, and chronic stress. They said my brain had created those images to protect me, to fill in the gaps I had refused to confront. They examined my laptop. There was no video recorded at 3:12 a.m., no hidden files, no deleted data. Even the webcam activity logs didn't exist. The old house was inspected afterward. No signs of forced entry, no physical evidence. Everything I believed was real left no trace anywhere except in my memory. I was prescribed medication. The panic attacks lessened. My sleep became more regular. The doctors said I was improving. I began to accept that maybe it had all been delusions, an extreme reaction of the mind to isolation. I repeated that explanation to myself every day, like a mantra, just to stay grounded. I moved somewhere else. More people, more noise. I returned to work. I started socializing again. People said I looked better, and maybe they were right. I could smile. I could sleep. I no longer saw things that weren't there, but the sense of fully owning myself never completely came back. Sometimes I stand in front of the mirror for too long, not out of fear, but confusion. I realize I'm no longer sure what familiarity is supposed to feel like when looking at myself. Nothing is distorted, nothing looks back at me. Yet I always feel like the reflection is trying to remember who I am, just like I once tried to remember myself. The doctors say I'm cured, but no one can explain why the gaps in my memory remain. No one can explain the exhaustion that feels like having lived someone else's life. I start to wonder whether the delusions truly ended, or if I simply learned how to coexist with them more effectively. Maybe it was all just an illness. Maybe nothing ever watched me. No double. No thing learning how to become me. But if that's true, then why? Every time I stare at the mirror for too long, do I feel that if I were to leave first, whatever remains wouldn't know what to do with my life?
My name is Graves. I'm 42 years old. I work the night shift at a small burger restaurant on the outskirts of Berlin, right next to an abandoned, waterlogged field. I'm sitting in front of a camera right now. It's placed on a metal shelf in the kitchen, pointed directly at me. I turned it on myself. No one asked me to do this. This isn't a diary, and it isn't a confession. I'm only stating this clearly, that at this moment, I am fully awake, working alone, and not under the influence of alcohol or any substances. If anything after this night shift is distorted or denied, this recording will be the only reference proving that I was fully aware when I began telling what happened. After midnight, the restaurant is almost completely empty. Most nights it's just me at the counter, the kitchen behind me, and the drive-through window facing a road with no street lights. The work is repetitive, so quiet, that sometimes I can hear my own heartbeat between orders. The night shift isn't scary if you're used to it. And I was used to it. The fluorescent lights, the hiss of the fryer, the wind blowing in from the muddy field behind the building. I knew exactly when cars usually showed up, and when they didn't. The only thing I wasn't used to was when everything happened too perfectly. So normal it stopped feeling random. Around 1 in the morning, a car pulled up to the drive-thru. The window rolled down just a little. I only heard a man's voice, low, steady. He ordered a standard burger meal. No changes. At the payment window, the glass lowered just enough for a card. I never saw his face. The payment went through, and the car drove off. It didn't stop at the pickup window. I waited a few minutes, thinking he'd come back. He didn't. I set the bag aside. Night shifts come with strange customers. Drunks. People who forget. I didn't think much of it. But one detail stayed with me. He'd ordered the one item I could prepare the fastest, as if he didn't need to think about it at all. 3 nights later, at the same time, the car returned. Same position. Same barely lowered window. Same voice. Same order. My stomach tightened before he even finished speaking, because I already knew every word. He paid. And again, he drove away without taking the food. I stood there behind the glass for a long time. I started paying closer attention. The car always came from the same direction. Stopped at the exact same distance. Never turned the engine off. Never hesitated. Everything was too precise. I no longer felt like I was serving a customer. It felt like I was participating in something rehearsed. And I was just one piece of it. A week passed. I realized I was starting to wait for the car. As 1 a.m. approached, I kept glancing at the window. When it didn't come, I felt restless. When it did, my spine went cold. I hated that feeling, getting used to something that made me uneasy. It made the nights feel longer. The third time that week, the car arrived earlier. The voice was the same, but slower. When I confirmed the order, there was a long pause. Too long. Then he answered. I couldn't see his face, but I had the unmistakable feeling that he was looking straight at me through the tinted glass. After that, I stopped telling myself it was coincidence. No one pays for the same food at the same time, night after night, just to drive away. No one repeats a meaningless action for that long. If he wasn't there to eat, then why was he there? At the end of my shift, while wiping down the drive-through window, my hand stopped. It felt like someone had been standing there for a long time. There were no marks, no car, but the feeling was clear. This repetition wasn't a habit. It was a test, and I was the thing being tested. That night, the restaurant was completely empty. No cars, no movement, just the wind coming from the muddy land behind the building. I leaned against the counter, staring out at the drive-through longer than usual. The wall clock ticked forward, minute by minute. I started to feel that if the car didn't show up, its absence would be more frightening than its presence. At 1:02 a.m., the motion sensor light outside the drive-through turned on. The familiar car slid into view as if it had never left. No horn, no hesitation. Before I could greet him, the voice came through, reciting the exact same order, not a single word different. I confirmed it automatically, like a reflex that had already been trained. When I read the total, he didn't respond right away. There was a silence, too long to be normal. Then he spoke very quietly.
Do you work the night shift alone?
A simple question, one that didn't belong in a drive-through at 1 a.m. I stared at the tinted window, searching for movement. All I saw was my own reflection. He paid. I printed the receipt. I placed the bag at the pickup window. I waited. The car didn't move forward, didn't reverse. The engine kept running. Then suddenly, it turned away, just like every other time. This time, I wasn't annoyed. I only felt like I had just completed the part of the exchange he actually needed. After the car left, I looked down at the payment window. There was a faint streak of moisture, like someone had pressed a hand against the glass and then pulled it away. I bent down to wipe it, assuming it was condensation. But when my fingers touched the glass, it was ice cold, even though the restaurant was warm. I stopped. A wet handprint was clearly visible on the glass. Far too large, and far too high. Almost half a meter above my head. Impossible to reach from where a customer would stand. Water dripped downward in thin trails. I leaned closer. It smelled like living mud, flooded earth, heavy and unmistakable. I opened the door and looked outside. No car, no person. The road was empty. The muddy land behind the restaurant was pitch black, without a single light. I turned back to the window. The handprint was still there, clear and undeniable, like something that didn't need me to witness it to exist. I wiped the glass again, and again. The print faded slightly, but the smell didn't. Each time I dragged the cloth across the surface, it felt like I was wiping something that had just withdrawn its hand, not something that had been there for a while. My breathing grew heavier. My heart raced. Nothing was happening. And yet, everything was. When I lifted my head, I noticed a second handprint, higher than the first, as if someone had placed their hand over the old mark, but at an even greater height. I stood completely still. A stupid thought flashed through my mind, one I couldn't get rid of. It was testing different heights. I locked the doors earlier than required, turned off some of the lights. I stood behind the counter, staring outside. From that moment on, I no longer felt like I was working in a restaurant. I felt like I was standing inside a space that had been marked, and the car was just the way it knew I was still here. The next morning, just before my shift ended, I went back to the window. The handprint was lighter, but still there, like a stain that had been left on purpose. I measured the height again, almost half a meter above my head. I stretched my arm as high as I could, stood on my toes. I couldn't reach it, which meant whatever put its hand there wasn't standing on the ground. While mopping the floor near the drive-thru, I noticed small specks of mud. Not footprints, drops. Like mud dripping off something that was still wet. I crouched down and smelled it. The same scent. Living mud. Soaked earth. The smell was identical to the swampy land behind the restaurant. During my break, I walked around to the back. The ground was soft and sunken. There was a long drag mark, as if something heavy had been pulled across the mud. Not a normal human trail. Before I could look closer, I heard metal lightly tapping behind me. The trash storage door rattled. I turned around. No one was there. On the third night, the car returned. Same time. Same order. Same voice. But this time, when I asked to confirm the order, he stayed silent for a long moment. Then he said,
Did you clean the glass yet?
My body went cold. I had never told anyone about the handprint. I didn't respond. He paid. And once again, he drove away. Around 2:40 a.m., all the exterior lights shut off, just for a second. When they flickered back on, the glass trembled slightly, like something had just hit it. I stepped closer. A new handprint was forming on the window, still wet, slowly dripping downward. A dull thok echoed from the front of the building. Soft, like a small stone hitting glass. I froze, listening. No cars, no strong wind. Just me. And the low hum of the refrigerator behind me. I told myself it was probably a bird. But nothing flies at night in the mudlands. A large rock slammed into the front window. The glass spiderwebbed instantly, the sound exploding through the silence. I screamed on instinct, stumbling backward and crashing into the soda rack. Glass shattered across the floor. I scrambled up and peered through the cracked glass. There was no one outside. No car. No figure. Only the dark, motionless swamp behind the restaurant. The rock lay at the base of the window, soaked, covered in living mud. It didn't come from the road. It came from behind the building. I locked every door. My hand slipped on the phone as I called the police. While I waited, I crouched behind the counter, eyes fixed on the broken glass. I felt, with absolute certainty, that if I looked away, whatever threw the rock would move closer. Before the police arrived, I saw something that froze my blood. In the unbroken section of glass, I could see my reflection, and right behind me, very close, stood a dark shape. Upright, its neck tilted at an angle no living body should ever have. The police arrived. They documented the broken glass, the rock, the mud stains. They said it was probably random vandalism. No one was found near the swamp behind the restaurant. When they left, the building fell back into absolute silence. I stood alone under the fluorescent lights, staring at the window patched with temporary tape. In the warped reflection, I had the strange sensation that my reflection was moving, a fraction of a second slower than me. I checked the security footage. The moment the rock hit the window, the video glitched, not a total blackout. The frame stretched and warped, as if something had moved too close to the lens. In the last frame before the glass shattered, there was a tall, distorted shape. Its head was tilted sharply to the left. I rewound the footage again and again. Each time I watched it, its neck seemed bent a little further. Behind the restaurant, inside the trash storage area, I found something I couldn't explain away. An old uniform shirt, the kind we stopped using years ago. Soaked, caked in mud, stuffed behind a stack of cardboard boxes. The collar was torn, right at the back of the neck. I remembered what the police said about a homeless man living nearby. But one question wouldn't leave my head. Why was he wearing my uniform? I still had to work. That night, there were no customers, no cars, no voices. But I felt someone standing behind me, close enough that I could sense cold breath on my neck. Every time I turned around, there was nothing. Just the freezer. Just the white wall. But in the stainless steel surfaces, my reflection looked slightly tilted. Around 3 a.m., all the lights shut off. No warning, no sound. Darkness swallowed the room. I stood completely still. In those few seconds, I heard fabric dragging softly across the floor, very close. Then, click. The lights came back on. When the lights returned, I looked straight at the glass. This time, I wasn't alone in the reflection. Something was standing behind me. It was wearing my uniform. Same shirt, same hat, same name tag. But its neck was twisted completely backward. Its head hung at a broken angle, eyes wide open, staring directly at me. I spun around. There was nothing there. When I turned back to the glass, it was still there. Closer now, in the reflection. I couldn't move. And that's when I realized something worse. It wasn't copying me. It was standing still. I was the one shaking. A sharp pain shot up my spine. Light. But wrong. Like my neck was being pulled in a direction my body didn't agree with. In the glass, the thing smiled. Its mouth twisted. Its head rotated a little more, as if demonstrating something, as if teaching me. I stepped backward. In the reflection, I didn't. The image stayed perfectly still, straighter than me, more certain, as if it belonged there. I finally understood. It didn't want to kill me. It just wanted to stand where it belonged. And that meant I didn't. The end of shift alarm rang. The familiar sound snapped me out of the paralysis. When I blinked, the reflection was just me again, alone. But my neck still hurt. And ever since that night, whenever I stare into a mirror for too long, I always notice the same thing. I'm standing a fraction of a second behind myself. 2 days later, the police returned. They had found the homeless man living in the swamp behind the restaurant. He was thin, unnaturally tall, his neck permanently tilted to one side. The record showed that years ago, he had suffered a broken neck during a fight, and survived. The officers said everything finally made sense. I nodded. I was supposed to feel relieved. They said he had been rummaging through the trash, stealing old uniforms. The muddy handprints were his. The rock, too. The repeated food orders were likely a compulsive way to be present. Everything was categorized as psychological harassment. No supernatural elements. A clean report. I signed the paperwork. My hands didn't shake anymore. The window was replaced. New uniforms arrived. Night shifts returned to being just me. No strange customers. No handprints. No rocks. Everything slipped back into routine. But I noticed something had changed. I stopped looking at mirrors the way I used to. I never stare too long anymore. Because every time I do, I have to make sure I'm standing in the right place. The first night after it was over, I dreamed of the restaurant. The lights were on. The counters were clean. I stood in front of the glass. But in the dream, I couldn't turn my head. My neck was held in place. And in the reflection, I saw myself standing behind me, watching me, with my neck completely twisted backward. The dream came back every night. Always the same scene. Always the same angle. I stand in front. The thing behind me never moves. It just waits. I wake up with a dull ache in my neck, like I slept in the wrong position. The doctor says it's prolonged stress. I nod. I'm used to things having explanations. One day, I accidentally looked into a mirror in daylight. For a split second, my neck looked slightly tilted to the left, just a little. I straightened it. But the wrongness didn't go away, as if my body was slowly learning a new posture, quietly, without asking me. No one tells you this. Someone who survives a broken neck never truly becomes straight again. The body adapts. The new position becomes normal. And I started to wonder, what if something had adapted to me, and I simply hadn't noticed yet? One late night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at home. The light flickered. I stared at myself for a long time. There was no one else. No strange reflection. But the feeling was unmistakable. If I walked away first, whatever remained would stand there, unsure of what to do next. The police did everything right. The report was complete. Everything was logical. But there was no line that said this. The greatest fear isn't being watched. It's being replaced, legally, by an explanation that's just good enough to make you stay quiet. If you work the night shift alone, if your reflection ever feels one beat slower, don't trust that things are over just because there's a reasonable explanation. Because sometimes, what's standing behind you doesn't need to kill you. It only needs you to get used to standing a little crooked.
My name is Ryder. I'm 27 years old, living in Oregon. I recently graduated and I work freelance, which means I spend most of my time alone at home. This house has belonged to my family for years, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people recognize each other but rarely talk. I used to like that quiet, at least until I realized something. quiet doesn't mean unnoticed. My life runs on a routine. I work during the day, stay up late, sleep late. Every night, without thinking, I look out the window. It's just a habit. After midnight, the street is usually empty. Yellow streetlights, no cars, no sound. And because everything is so consistent, anything even slightly out of place feels wrong. Uncomfortably wrong. I don't remember the exact night the car first appeared. What I remember is the feeling that it had already been there before I noticed it. A dark-colored vehicle parked along the curb across from my house. No headlights, no interior light, no movement. I watched it for a few seconds, then looked away. I told myself someone had just pulled over. Maybe they were on the phone. Maybe they'd fallen asleep. That explanation felt sufficient at the time. The next night, the car was still there. Same spot, same angle. I started paying closer attention. No one got out, no doors opened, no sound at all. I checked the time, almost 1 a.m. I stood behind the curtain for a long while, trying to invent a reasonable explanation. But none of them explained how a car could remain completely motionless for hours without a single sign of life. I convinced myself it was a neighbor or someone new to the area. Oregon is full of people with strange habits. But logic started to slip when I noticed one thing. The car only appeared at night. By morning, it was gone. No oil stains, no fresh tire marks. As if it only existed while I was home and vanished before I woke up. I began tracking the timing. Sometime after midnight, never earlier, never later, the car would appear. I never once saw it arrive, and I never once saw it leave. By morning, it was always gone. The strangest part wasn't fear. It was the feeling that I was late to something, like someone had been waiting for me long before I noticed. I hate admitting this, but there were nights I looked out the window on purpose. If the car wasn't there yet, I felt restless. When it finally appeared, my stomach dropped. I didn't understand how its presence had become part of my routine, like I was being trained to expect it, to recognize it. One night, I stepped outside. Not too close, not too far. The windshield reflected the streetlight. I saw no silhouette, no movement, no breath fogging the glass. The car looked empty. And yet, I knew if I took one more step, I would cross an invisible line I wasn't meant to cross. After nearly a week, I stopped calling it coincidence. No one parks in front of someone else's house every night at the same hour in total silence. No one waits without leaving evidence. And that's when I started asking myself, if no one was waiting to do something, then who were they waiting for to notice? That night I didn't work. I sat in the dark, staring out the window. The car was still there, unmoving, unconcerned with whether I watched or not. But I knew, it knew, and that was when I understood. It wasn't the car. It was the moment I changed the way I lived just to coexist with its presence. I started noticing a small detail, one that felt wrong the longer I looked at it. The car didn't just park for hours. It parked for a precise duration. I kept a clock running on my computer. Every time I checked the window at 12:47, it was already there. Every time I looked again after 3 a.m., it still hadn't moved. Like someone had assigned themselves a shift, centered around my house. I tried changing my routine, sleeping earlier, staying up later. The car didn't change. No matter when I appeared at the window, it was always there. Same spot, same angle. The worst part wasn't seeing it. It was not knowing anymore. Whether I was watching the car, or the car was waiting for me to appear. Like one of us was following the other's schedule. One night, the car didn't show up. I felt relief, an odd, hollow relief. Then it turned into restlessness. I checked the street again, and again, too many times. By nearly 2 a.m., my hands were shaking, not because the car was there, but because it wasn't. Like something familiar had suddenly gone missing. At 2:13 a.m., just as I turned away from the window, I heard it. A soft thud, even, measured, like a foot touching wooden floor. I froze. The house was silent. I told myself it was pipes, or wood shifting from the cold. But then it happened again. Same rhythm. No hurry. Not random. The next night the car returned. Same time as before. And the moment I noticed it, the footsteps started again. Not early, not late. Exactly when I woke up. I checked the clock. 2:13. I didn't leave my room. I just stood there, listening. Each step landing like someone following a schedule I didn't know I had created. The top floor of the house has been empty for years. No one sleeps there. No one goes up there. I know every sound this house makes. But these footsteps weren't mice, not wind, not wood settling. They had weight. Pauses between steps, like someone walking, unhurried, without purpose. I started connecting the patterns. Nights with the car always had footsteps. Nights without the car, the house was completely silent. No exceptions. I had never seen anyone leave the vehicle, but for the first time, I thought of something worse. Maybe I didn't need to see them leave, because they were already inside. I forced myself to stay awake all night. No sleep, no drifting. I watched the window until dawn. The car stayed, but there were no footsteps. Only when exhaustion pulled me under, just for a few minutes, did the sound return. Soft, even, like it only existed when I wasn't fully awake. One night, the footsteps stopped earlier than usual. I opened my eyes, checked the clock. 3 minutes early. Before I could relax, the car's interior light turned on. Just for 1 second, long enough to see the front seat was empty. No driver, no silhouette. Scene 1 and 2, intersection. That was when I understood. These weren't separate events. The car outside and the footsteps inside weren't acting independently. They were reacting to me. to my routine, to my sleep, to the moment I crossed from awake to unaware. And the most terrifying part wasn't being watched. It was realizing I had become the center of a system learning how to move around me. The footsteps continued every night, with a precision I could no longer deny. Not early, not late, never rushed. They always began seconds after I opened my eyes, in that half-awake state. I didn't need a clock anymore. I knew I was awake the moment I heard them. The house had started using me as its measure of time. I noticed something else. The footsteps never traveled beyond a certain point. They followed the same short path over and over. Like whoever was walking had no intention of going anywhere. Just walking, then turning back. I imagined someone pacing the empty floor, not looking around, not searching, just maintaining rhythm. That thought chilled me more than any sudden noise ever could. I started sleeping poorly. Every night, as darkness fell, my body tensed automatically, as if waiting for a familiar signal. Some nights, I dreamed I was walking in the dark, hearing my own footsteps echo behind me. I woke up with a strange sense of shame, like I had been rehearsing something, instead of trying to escape it. One night, the footsteps didn't come. I lay still, my heart pounding harder than on nights with sound. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. This silence didn't feel like rest. It felt like a pause, the kind someone takes before deciding to move again. I realized I wasn't afraid of the noise. I was afraid that it could choose to change. That morning, I checked the entire house. Not because I expected to find someone, but because I needed to know I hadn't missed anything. Everything was where it should be. No doors open, no disturbed objects. The top floor was still empty. But when I stepped into the backyard, I saw the landscaper crouch lower than usual, staring into the bushes along the fence. He called me over. In his hand was something small, covered in dirt and dry leaves. A camera. Tiny. No bigger than a car key. No wires. No memory card. The battery was dead. He asked if I had installed it. I couldn't answer, because in that moment, every sound from my nights suddenly gained weight. We examined it carefully. No stored data. No SIM card. No sign of remote access. That meant only one thing. This camera had worked live. Someone had stood close enough to my house, long enough, to watch everything in real time until the battery died. And when it stopped working, I stared at that bush for a long time. The camera's position had a direct view into my bedroom window. Perfect angle. Perfect height. I thought about the call on the street. The nights I woke up at the exact same time. One thought made it hard to breathe. When the camera died, the watching didn't stop. It just changed methods. I didn't call the police right away. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't know what to say. A camera with no data, a sound that couldn't be recorded, a car with no clear license plate. Everything existed, but nothing was solid enough to become evidence. That's when I understood what it means to be watched without proof. and that's far more dangerous than any intruder. That night, I didn't sleep, but the footsteps still came, as if they no longer needed me to be half awake. They had been confirmed, acknowledged, seen, and once the camera was discovered, I understood something clearly. Some things don't begin when you notice them. They only reveal themselves when denial is no longer possible. After graduating, I left Oregon. Not for opportunity, but for distance. I worked remotely, changed my schedule, changed my habits. But some things didn't change. The feeling of being watched wasn't tied to a place. Wherever I went, I avoided windows at night. I still woke up minutes before my alarm, heart racing, as if my body remembered an old schedule I no longer followed. There was no car outside, no footsteps, no camera. But the silence didn't bring relief. It felt deliberate. I noticed myself adjusting, closing curtains earlier, changing walking routes, never posting in real time. No one told me to. I did it myself. And that scared me more than anything, because I no longer needed a watcher to change how I lived. Years later, I went to Paris with my family. A rare vacation. Crowded streets, constant light. I told myself, if anything could end it, it would be a city too large to track one person. The first days felt normal. I relaxed. And that was my mistake, because I forgot that surveillance doesn't need noise.
In a small bar, amid laughter and low music, a familiar sensation returned. Someone was watching me for too long. Not a passing look, not idle curiosity. I turned on a reflex that had been asleep for years, and the feeling locked into place. Like an old piece finally fitting its slot. In the corner of the room, a man sat alone. Calm. No smile. No hurry. His gaze wasn't searching. It was confirming. I knew this feeling. It was identical to the moment I realized the car parked outside my house hadn't been random. He looked at me as if checking something he already knew the answer to. I didn't need to remember his face to be certain. The feeling was enough. When I met his eyes, he didn't look away. No surprise. No reaction. Just a slight nod, as if acknowledging we shared the same memory, without ever speaking. That's when I understood. Evidence was no longer necessary. He stood up and left the bar before I could react. I followed him a few steps, then stopped. Not out of fear, but because I knew chasing him would break the only rule that had kept me safe. Don't initiate. By the time I reached the door, the street had swallowed him. The same way the past had swallowed every trace before. A few days later, in broad daylight, I saw him again, this time farther away. He was holding a camera, photographing the scene behind me. I couldn't tell if the lens was pointed at me or not. But he didn't need to photograph me to remember. The fact that I turned my head at that exact moment was enough for him to know I was still in frame. When I told my family, they believed me, but there was nothing they could do. No crime. No approach. No threats. The police had no grounds. And I realized the most terrifying truth. The most effective surveillance is the kind that stays just below intervention. Never crossing the line. Only standing close enough to be felt. That night, in the hotel room, I looked out over the glowing city of Paris. I understood then that distance no longer mattered. Neither did time. Whatever he was, or whoever he was, didn't need to stay close. All he needed was for me to know that if he wanted to, he could appear. And from that moment on, The surveillance had completed its purpose. After Paris, I returned to the United States. Nothing dramatic happened on the flight. No one followed me. No one approached. But the sense of safety didn't return. I realized I had stopped looking for signs outside. Instead, I started checking myself. Was I staring out the window too long? Was I choosing seats based on sight lines? Was I still the person I used to be? I tried reporting it to the police. Everything made sense on paper. No crime, no threats, no direct contact. What I described sounded more like intuition than events. The file was closed quickly. I signed without arguing. Because I understood, systems only respond when a boundary is crossed. Everything just beneath the boundary exists legally. I moved. Changed my number. Changed my routine. Stopped posting my location. Stopped coming home at the same time. I told friends I preferred a minimalist lifestyle. The truth was simpler. I was optimizing myself to be harder to track. The scariest part wasn't that I did it. It was that I did it well. As if I'd been trained for it. No car. No footsteps. No camera. The absence lasted for years. And in that silence, I realized the objective had been achieved. No one needed to watch me anymore. I had taken over the role myself. I regulated my behavior without reason, without a specific fear, only the memory that it had happened once. From the outside, I'm fine. I work. I socialize. I smile. But there are things I no longer do. I don't stand with my back to windows at night. I don't sleep deeply near streetlights. I never forget that some eyes don't need to be present to have an effect. And that makes every normal moment conditional. I used to think being watched was an action. I was wrong. Surveillance is a process. It doesn't end when the watcher disappears. It ends when you stop living naturally. When every decision passes through an invisible filter. Will this draw attention? Even when no one is there. I don't need to see him again. No new evidence. No confirmation. Paris was enough. It proved one thing. Distance doesn't protect you from deliberate attention. When someone watches long enough, they don't need to continue. The imprint stays with you. And you carry it everywhere. I'm still alive. Not attacked. Not missing. No clear tragedy to report. But survival isn't the same as safety. Some things don't kill you. They teach you how to exist in a narrower way. Less spontaneous. Less free. And society calls that growing up. No report mentions that the most effective fear doesn't need repetition. No form explains that when someone self-regulates long enough, the watcher can leave without a trace. Legally, there was no crime. But on a human level, there was a perfect occupation. If you ever feel like you're living more carefully than necessary, if you change your behavior without being asked, don't assume it's over. Because sometimes, the watcher doesn't need to be there anymore. Their victory is when you live as if you're being watched, forever.
My name is Aaron. I'm 31 years old. I work the night shift as a security guard at a cold storage facility in Minnesota. My job is simple. Patrol, check doors, watch the cameras, write reports. No one likes working here at night. But I needed the money. And I thought I was used to the quiet. I was wrong. The facility is isolated from the town. It's cold during the day. At night, it's so silent I can hear my own heartbeat. Long rows of frozen storage units stretch out. Heavy steel doors, each marked with a number. The temperature stays below -10 degrees. No windows. Only pale fluorescent lights, flickering slightly whenever the wind moves outside. My shift lasts 8 hours. I walk the same route every night. From Unit 1 to Unit 12. Each patrol takes about 20 minutes. The security cameras are always on. Every movement is recorded. I trusted that system. At least until my final night. Around 2 in the morning. I was walking between 2 storage rows. When I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast. Not heavy. But very clear. I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. I turned around. The hallway was empty. I went back to the control room. And checked the camera monitors. No one. No movement anywhere in the facility. No system errors. No blind spots. I told myself I must have imagined it. In a place this quiet, the human brain is good at creating sounds. 20 minutes later, I started my next patrol. Same hallway. Same lights. And the footsteps came back. This time, closer. I walked faster. They matched my pace. As if, whatever it was keeping a precise distance behind me. I called into my radio. No response. I was the only one on shift. I stopped moving. Held my breath. The footsteps were still there. Right behind me. But when I turned around, only freezing air hit my face. I stared at the camera feeds again. Everything looked normal. Too normal. No one following me. No one standing in the hallways. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The sound had rhythm. It had weight. It sounded exactly like human footsteps. From that moment on, I stopped walking slowly. Every step felt heavier. I started to feel like I wasn't the only one patrolling that place anymore. Even though I saw no one. Even though the cameras showed nothing. Something was moving with me. Staying close in the dark. I didn't tell anyone about it. I finished my shift like normal. Signed the logbook. Turned off the lights. And left. But as I closed the final door of the facility, I heard footsteps echoing inside. And this time, they didn't stop. The next night, I went back to work. I had spent all day thinking about what happened before. I told myself it was just exhaustion. Or imagination. I didn't tell my supervisor. I didn't write anything in the report. I walked into the facility like I always did. But this time, I paid closer attention. Listening carefully to every small sound. The shift started quietly. No footsteps. No strange noises. Just the steady hum of the cooling machines. But the silence didn't feel comforting. It felt stretched. Like a pause that lasted too long. As if the place was waiting for me to relax again. Before starting something else. As I passed Storage Unit 4, I noticed something was wrong. The door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, just a few centimeters. I was sure I had locked it the night before. I stood there, staring at the door for a moment. Then I pushed it shut again. I didn't write it down. 20 minutes later, I returned to Unit 4. The door was open again. Not wider. Just not fully closed. Like someone had opened it and stopped halfway. I looked around. The hallway was empty. The camera above was still on. No error warnings. I started checking more carefully. I slowed down. Used my flashlight to scan the floor. No footprints. No drag marks. No signs of forced entry. Just the storage door. No longer sitting where it was supposed to be. As I crouched down to inspect the door hinge, the footsteps came back behind me. This time, they were clear. Very close. I froze. Didn't turn around right away. The sound stopped. Right behind me. As if it was waiting for me to look. I turned around. No one was there. I ran straight back to the control room and pulled up every camera feed. The hallway was empty. No movement anywhere. But on the screen, the door to Unit 4 was open by the exact same gap I had just seen. On the next patrol, I checked Unit 4 again. The door was open a little more this time. Not much. Just a few more centimeters. But enough for me to realize. Something was changing. Not quickly. Not urgently. But patiently. I started tracking the time. Each patrol. About 20 minutes apart. Every time I came back. The door was open a little wider. It never closed on its own. It never opened all the way. Like someone didn't want me to notice too soon. By almost 3 in the morning. It wasn't just Unit 4. Other storage units were starting to open too. Each one, just slightly. No two doors were the same. I stood in the middle of the freezing hallway, listening to the footsteps behind me. And for the first time, I thought about Unit 7. Unit 7 is at the far end of the west hallway. I never liked that area. Not because anything obvious was wrong, but because it was always colder than the others. The camera there was older too. I stood in front of Unit 7 for a few seconds. The door was fully closed. Not open, but standing there. Made me want to leave immediately. On the next patrol, I returned to Unit 7. The door was still closed, but the indicator light on the camera above it flickered slightly. It didn't shut off. It didn't trigger an error. It just blinked, like a quick eye twitch. I noted it mentally. I didn't report it yet. I went back to the control room and pulled up the feed for Unit 7. The image was delayed by a few seconds. Not much, but enough for me to notice. I raised my hand in front of the camera. On the screen, that hand moved slower than my own breathing. I walked back into the hallway. Stopped directly in front of Unit 7. I opened the live camera feed on my phone. On the screen, I was still standing, at the far end of the hallway. Not near the door, but in reality, my hand was already touching the freezing metal. I opened the door to Unit 7. Cold air slammed into my face. Inside was completely empty. No goods. No containers. Just white concrete floors covered in frost. The camera on the ceiling was still on, but when I looked up at it, the monitor in the control room froze instantly. The camera feed locked up, right as I was standing inside the unit. No signal loss. No switch to another camera. It just stopped. When the image came back, I was standing in the hallway. The door to Unit 7 was closed. I couldn't remember how I had stepped out. I reviewed the footage. The video played smoothly. No cuts. No missing frames. According to the cameras, I never entered Unit 7. But my hands were still numb from the cold. My gloves were damp with frost, as if I had been inside for a long time. Every time I stood in front of Unit 7, the camera lagged. Not early, not late, always at that exact moment. Like something didn't want to be recorded. Not the whole facility, just this spot. Only when I was there. I started avoiding Unit 7, taking longer routes. But the camera still lagged. Even when I stood nearby. The door never opened. It made no sound. But I knew, if I stepped any closer, something would change. Near the end of the shift, I stood at the far end of the hallway, looking toward Unit 7. The door was still closed. Every other camera was working perfectly. Only that screen was slower than the rest. I turned the monitor off. I didn't want to see it anymore. And I had no idea. That night wasn't the last one. That night was my final shift. I had already decided to quit. No notice. No explanation. I just wanted to finish the night and leave that place forever. But the moment I stepped inside the facility, I knew something was different. The air felt colder than usual. The silence felt wrong. I completed a full patrol. Every storage unit was sealed shut. No doors left ajar. No footsteps behind me. The cameras were running smoothly. No lag. No delay. Unit 7 included. Everything was too perfect. And that scared me. I stood in front of Unit 7. This time, the camera didn't flicker. No warning signs. No strange behavior. I checked the monitor in the control room. The image was clear. I stood alone in front of the door. No one behind me. Nothing in the hallway. I took a deep breath and opened it. Cold air slammed into my body. Unit 7 was darker than the others. The ceiling lights turned on slowly. The light spread across the white concrete floor. At first, I saw nothing. Then I realized someone was standing at the far end. Not moving. Not turning around. Standing upright. Completely still. He was wearing a security uniform. Exactly like mine. The jacket. The hat. The name tag. I looked down at my own chest. Then back at him. We were identical in a way that felt wrong. But there was one difference. He wasn't shaking. The temperature inside the unit was low enough to numb skin. I was shivering. My breath turned into white mist. But he wasn't affected. He stood there. Calm. No heavy breathing. No movement. Then slowly, he turned his face toward me. His skin was pale. His eyes stared straight at me. Unblinking. The corner of his mouth lifted into a faint smile. Not violent. Not threatening. Just a smile that suggested he had been there for a long time. and that he knew I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stepped backward, one step at a time, never turning my back. When the storage door closed, I heard nothing from inside. No footsteps, no knocking, only the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. The next morning, I quit my job. I never returned to the facility. But the image followed me home, into my sleep, into my nightmares. 3 months later, I read a short news report. Police had discovered a body, frozen inside Unit 7. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stepped backward, one step at a time, never turning my back. When the storage door closed, I heard nothing from inside. No footsteps, no knocking, only the sound of my heart pounding in my ears.
My name is Daniel. I'm 35 years old. I work as a night delivery driver in Texas. I chose the night shift because it pays more, and because the roads are empty. Fewer people, fewer problems. My job is very clear. Accept orders. Deliver food. Take payment. I'm not paid to ask questions. I work from 10 at night until almost 4 in the morning. Most of my customers I never meet face to face. Deliver the order, leave the bag at the door, take a confirmation photo, leave. Some nights I don't speak to anyone at all. I'm used to that. Night makes people feel invisible, and I like that feeling. That night, I received a late order. The system labeled it new customer. The address was in the suburbs, a single house, no porch light. No special instructions, just a normal order. I had delivered to hundreds of houses like that before, and I thought, this would just be another one. I rang the doorbell, no one answered. A few seconds later, the door opened slightly, just enough to show a hand. No face, no voice. The hand placed cash through the gap. I set the food down. Everything happened very quickly, and very quietly. As I turned to leave, I felt like I was being watched, not from the doorway, but from somewhere deep inside the house, like someone was standing far back in the darkness. I didn't turn around. There was no reason to. I got into my car and drove away. I thought I had forgotten about it. The next night, I received another order. New customer, same address. I parked in front of the house and sat there for a few seconds. I told myself it was just a coincidence. People place repeat orders all the time. Nothing strange about that. But when the door opened slightly again, the same feeling returned. The same narrow gap in the door. The same hand reaching out with cash. No words, no lights, not a single sound. Everything was identical to the night before. Too identical. I noticed the door trembled slightly, as if someone was leaning against it from the inside. As I bent down to place the bag, I heard a sound from inside the house, very faint, like something being dragged across the floor. I looked up. The door was still barely open. The hand was gone. The sound stopped. I stood there longer than I needed to. I walked back to my car with my heart beating faster. I explained it all to myself. Maybe furniture, maybe a pet, maybe my imagination. Night makes people overthink. I didn't leave any notes in the app. I didn't report anything. The order was marked completed. On the third night, when I saw that same address appear on my screen again, I hesitated, just for a moment, but I still accepted the order. I needed the money, and I thought I had gotten used to that house. I didn't know then that some things become more dangerous the more familiar they feel. On the third night, I returned to that house, same address, still labeled new customer. I parked in front of the gate. No lights turned on as I approached. No sign anyone was waiting for the delivery. I sat in my car for a few seconds, staring at the front door. Then I told myself I was overthinking it. I rang the doorbell. Still no response. A few seconds later, the door opened slightly again. The same gap as before, no wider, no narrower. A hand reached out, placed the cash on the edge of the door. No shaking, no hesitation. Exactly like the last two nights. I bent down to place the food bag. This time, the door didn't close right away. It stayed open at the same narrow gap, as if someone was standing behind it, holding the door with their full body weight. I didn't see a face. I didn't hear breathing. Only a heavy silence, one that made me afraid to stand up straight. From inside the house, I heard the dragging sound again. This time, it wasn't vague. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across a wooden floor. Slow, steady, very close to the door. I looked up instinctively. The door was still open, but no one appeared. The sound stopped suddenly, too suddenly, like someone had realized I was listening. The hand disappeared from the doorway. The door slowly closed. Not hard, not rushed, just enough to make no noise at all. I stood on the porch for a few more seconds, not sure what I was waiting for. As I turned to leave, that feeling came back, stronger than before. Not like I was being watched from the door, but from deep inside the house, as if there was more than one person there, as if they were standing still, waiting for me to walk far enough away. I didn't look back. On the way back to my car, I opened the delivery app, checked my order history. 3 nights in a row, the same house, but every order was marked new customer. No repeated names, no old accounts, no previous history. Like, a different person placed the order each night. I told myself to stop, not to dig any deeper. This wasn't my responsibility. I was just the delivery driver. I had no right to investigate, no obligation to ask questions. I closed the app, started the car, and drove out of that neighborhood. But the dragging sound stayed in my head. The next night, I hoped I wouldn't see that address again, but it was still there, clear, unmistakable. I stared at the screen for a long time. My finger hovered over the accept button. In the end, I tapped it. I didn't know if it was for the money, or because I needed to know the truth. When I parked in front of the house for the 4th time, the door was already open. No need to ring the bell. No waiting. Inside was completely dark. No hand reached out with cash. Only a thick, damp smell, and the dragging sound, playing over and over, right behind the door. I stood in front of the partially open door for a long time. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't call out. I just listened. The dragging sound continued inside, slow, unhurried, like someone moving something familiar. Finally, I pushed the door open a little more. The darkness inside swallowed the porch light. The first thing I noticed wasn't what I saw. It was the smell. Damp, heavy, like clothes that never fully dried, mixed with a scent of old metal. I stepped inside. The floor creaked softly beneath my foot. The dragging sound stopped instantly. The silence became thick. The inside of the house was darker than I expected. No lights were on. Only faint light from the open door behind me. I saw an empty living room. No couch. No pictures. Just long scratch marks across the floor. As if something was dragged through here often. I swallowed hard and quietly asked, "Is anyone home?" No one answered me, but I heard breathing, very faint, uneven, coming from deeper inside the house. I stayed still, didn't move forward, didn't step back. That's when I realized the sound I'd heard these past nights wasn't an object. I crouched down near the doorway. The floor was covered in old scratches, layered on top of each other, leading from the hallway into the back room. I touched them lightly. The floor was cold, but the scratches weren't dusty, as if they were made recently, not long ago. The dragging sound started again, right behind me. I turned around very slowly. No one was there, but the door behind me was closed. No sound, no movement. I didn't remember closing it. My heart began to pound. I no longer thought this was a coincidence. Not a strange customer. Not a system error. Not bad luck. Something was very wrong in this house, and I had stepped too far inside to pretend I didn't see it. I turned to look for an exit. The porch light was weaker now. I moved quickly toward the door. My hand touched the handle. Ice cold. The door wasn't locked, but when I pulled, it didn't open right away, like something on the other side was holding it. Not forcefully, just enough to make me panic. I let go. I stood in the middle of the dark house. No lights. No dragging sound. Only the breathing. Closer now. Clearer. I understood I had only two choices. Run in blind panic, or move forward and face whatever was here. I took a deep breath. My heart hammered in my chest. I stepped toward the back room, toward the source of the sound. I knew. Just a few more steps, and I would see something I was never meant to see. And once that moment came, there would be no going back. I took a few more steps forward. The floor creaked softly beneath my feet. The door to the back room wasn't closed, just slightly ajar. The light from outside reached just far enough to see inside. I reached out and pushed the door. It opened very slowly. No resistance. No sound. And in that exact moment, I saw the truth. A man was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his hands tied behind him, his legs tightly bound, his mouth sealed with tape, his eyes wide open, bloodshot, staring straight at me, unable to scream, unable to move. Only his eyes, filled with panic and pleading. I understood immediately. The dragging sound I had heard for nights wasn't an object. It was his body, being pulled across the floor. Again and again, I saw long scrape marks behind him, skin torn, clothes ripped. He was shaking uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from fear. I looked around the room. There was no one else, no homeowner, no one handing me the cash, just the tired man, and an empty room, as if whoever did this had left just before I arrived, or had never needed to appear in front of me at all. I stepped back instinctively, my heart pounding, my ears ringing. I didn't know what to do first. Rip off the tape? Untie him? Or run? The man stared at me without blinking. He nodded slightly, very gently, as if begging me not to leave. And in that moment, I heard something behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare check if someone was standing behind me. I ran straight for the front door. It flew open when I pushed it hard. No resistance. No force holding it back. I ran to my car. My hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the wheels. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. I stopped a few blocks away and called the police. My voice wouldn't stay steady. I gave them the address, told them there was a man tied up inside, told them I was a delivery driver. I sat in my car, cold sweat soaking my back. I didn't know what scared me more. What was inside that house, or how long I had stood in front of it. The police found the man. He was alive, exhausted, injured. The homeowner was gone. No traces. No neighbors who saw anything. Like the house existed only to keep someone trapped. And once its purpose was done, it quietly vanished from normal life. I quit my job after that night. I don't do night deliveries anymore. I don't take late shifts. I don't drive past that neighborhood. But every time I leave food at someone's door, I remember that narrow opening, and the dragging sound in the dark. Some images only need to be seen once to stay with you forever. My job only required me to deliver food. It didn't require me to look inside. It didn't require me to ask questions. But some truths will force themselves into your sight. And when that happens, you can't pretend you didn't see them. Some doors should never be opened. But once they are, they can never be closed the same way again.